Wednesday. You know what that means. Time for the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour. I'm your host, Maddie Margarita, here with Diana Pardee on tap. Every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., the Southern California Writers Association welcomes a new writer to talk about themselves, their work, and their books. And this morning, we are pleased to have with us Jude Atwood. Jude is the author of the spooky middle grade mystery, Maybe There Are Witches, which came out June 13th and is currently available from Regal House. He got his first job at Okay, I have to read this bio because I just enjoyed this so much. So I'm going to read almost the whole thing. Jude got his first job at 15 detasseling, pulling the reproductive parts off corn plants for a seed corn company, making hybrid varieties of corn. And that goes down in best first sentence of a bio I have ever read. And I've read a lot of bios. He later moved to Orange County, where it hasn't snowed in over 70 years, and earned his M.F.A. in film from Chapman University. In Hollywood, he worked very briefly as an assistant in the office of a man who is now famous for throwing things at assistants. That's another podcast. Jude is now a full-time community college professor and devotes much of his energy to teaching mass communication and media literacy classes. In his career as an educator, Jude has received a commendation from the city of Santa Ana for his work with students, was honored with the Legacy Award from the American Readers Theater Association for contributions to the art of readers theater. His fiction has appeared in Broadside and Literally Stories, and his first novel, Maybe There Are Witches, won the 2021 Kraken Book Prize for middle grade fiction. Welcome, Jude Atwood.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm energized just by your bio.
Well, I'm glad.
And welcome. So I'm always fascinated by what people choose to write and spend their time with and spend their time on. So can we talk a little bit about why you decided to write this story and in this genre?
Well, that's a good question. I think I've always been, I'm a fan of a variety of genres, but I've always been a bit of a horror fan. And I think I read scary books. I loved to read scary things and do scary things when I was a kid, even though I didn't like being scared. Like if there was a fly-by-night haunted house on a vacation or something, I always wanted to go inside, and then I always wanted to get out as fast as I could. So the book itself actually started on a list of horror movie ideas that I had years and years ago. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting and sort of Twilight Zone-y if a woman moved into a house and she found a very old book, and as she read it, she realizes it was written to her. And then as I kind of let that percolate, I thought, wouldn't it be more interesting if it was a girl, if it was a 13-year-old girl? And so I started writing. It took me forever to come up with a decent title, and I went through lots of bad titles. But I started writing it as a young adult book, and then as I read more young adult books, I realized, oh, this is actually not where modern young adult fiction is. It's not, it's not really issue oriented. It's about a group of kids who have an adventure in a small town, and so I realized that's a middle grade story, and so I learned what middle grade fiction was as I was writing my first middle grade novel.
It's interesting. So we have Clara. So how did you get into her head? How did you get her voice? Where did her voice come from?
Well, even though she's a young woman, I would say that she's a little bit based on me. And I think that most authors would admit, even the villains have a lot of us in them. But I wanted her to be someone who was smart and relatable. And I wanted to avoid what I had kind of perceived in a lot of books for young people, where she's just constantly making bad choices. And so while she's not perfect, I didn't want her to be the reason that the reader was thinking like, oh, why? No, stop it. So I wanted her to be at least a little bit reasonable and logical. And so she has some friends and people that she meets who might be a little bit more on the bad choices side of things that she gets to deal with and to become friends with.
So is she the one that doesn't go upstairs? And there's upstairs. Yeah. So I think that's great. And so you have the story and you have the idea. What is the theme? I mean, did the theme emerge in this current iteration? Did the theme emerge, or was that theme always present in your head?
I think that because I don't think about theme right off the bat when I'm writing something, and I know that when I was a young reader, I wouldn't pick a book off the shelf because it's like, this is about honesty. I wanted a book that was about vampires or witches. And so I think that over the course of writing it, I realized that it's a book about how we get to know new people in our lives. And partly because it's about a girl who moves to a new town, but it's also about a girl who is discovering her own family history. And so I think that there's something very, at least to me, there's something very relatable about that, because no matter what age we are, it's sometimes it's a challenge to figure out someone who is new to us. And so I think that kind of sharpened over the different drafts of the book, but it's not. I think it was Mark Twain who wrote in the introduction to, I want to say it was Tom Sawyer, that anyone looking for a plot will be shot, anyone looking for a moral will be. And so I like to suggest that the book is not about a theme, but I think that it definitely has this undertone of understanding that first impressions are not always the best impressions.
Well, it sounds like a pretty good life lesson for anything. So, okay, from the title, maybe there are witches. You might suspect that maybe there are witches. So on a scale of like 1 to 10, how spooky, how scary is this book? And I'm just curious, when you talk about middle grade horror, how horrible, how horror is it? Or is it more fantasy? And what is the line between the two?
I think this would probably be about a 5 out of 10. I think it has some spooky elements, and I do think that it's more of an upper middle grade book. And I say that because I'm realizing as I tour and do interviews that some people think of like Roald Dahl books like James and the Giant Peach as middle grade. Some people think of Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time as middle grade. And there is a large span in terms of development between those books. And so I'm a little bit more, I don't think I'm quite as sophisticated as the mathematics and philosophy in Wrinkle in Time, but I think it's a little bit more for the older middle grade readers. I've been saying 9 to 13 years old. And I think that there's a little bit of violence. In fact, I've had to, when I queried an agent, they wanted a list of all of the violence before they would, consider it. And I mentioned, oh, there is an offstage murder. And so that might be a little bit scary, but it's mostly a sort of a spooky idea that there's, powerful witches out there who might be plotting something.
So when you wrote this and you had this idea and you had the character and you're writing it, how long did it take you to write?
Oh my gosh, Maddie, it took me so long. And partly, I think, because it was my first book. I started it in 2013. And then I thought that I would write an entire novel had a semester sabbatical in Portland, and I thought I will finish it and I'll get it done. And I got about half of it done. And realized, oh, I'm a much slower writer than I realized. And so then I returned to it off and on over the course of years. At one point, I decided, maybe this isn't going to happen. And then even after I had a finished draft and had finished multiple revisions, there was a point where I thought, this isn't going to sell. So I'm going to start a new project that is, a new idea. And at that point, I had entered it in several contests, and it ended up winning a publishing contract almost unbeknownst to me. And that was inspiring. But then, of course, there are more rounds of revisions as you get it ready for publication. But 7 years is my official number for how long it took me to write the book.
So in that 7 years, what was your favorite character that you added?
Well, I would like to say that I love all of my characters equally. But really, there is a character who represents, again, a sort of a part of me, as well as many people that I've known. Chris, who is kind of a backwoods boy, and he is 13 years old. He's one of those kids who's always had long hair and is proud of his long hair, and but also very just into stuff. He's into knives, and I think there's one draft where he was into fire spinning and all of the kind of dangerous things that appeal to kids. And one of my favorite scenes is when he shows his friends that his family has a dead coyote in their deep freeze in the basement. And I had an early reader who said, "Oh, that's a little too creepy for kids." And I thought, that was my life. My dad would always have either stuff that he'd hunted or stuff that he'd shot in our freezer, and probably still does, right? I think right this minute, down on the farm where I grew up, there's likely some game in the freezer. So I guess the answer to the question is, I'm kind of fascinated by the Chris character.
That's so funny that you said that, because in our freezer we had the same thing, but on the other side, my mother would put the laundry. He was going to iron, and then the food in the middle. So the regular food. So that's really funny. So when you were writing this book, I mean, it took you. This was a labor of love. So what was the most fun that you had? What was the most surprising and the most fun thing you learned while you were writing this book? I mean, we all know it's difficult, but or satisfying, whichever.
Well, I think that the best parts for me are the very beginning, when you're sort of brainstorming and anything is possible. And I'm also I like to kind of plot and outline. I got my M.F.A in film, and I think that I like to think about structure of a story, and so I always like to know how something is going to end when I'm writing it. And I know that not all writers share that. But I think writing, so the very beginning of the process, and then I think writing endings is fun. That figuring out a way to wrap up a lot of maybe conflicting storylines and ideas it's kind of a neat puzzle. And I think that's one of the big appealing things about writing for me.
So, this is such a short time period, and I would love to talk to you longer. But if you were going to leave people with a summary, or what you would want them to take from the book or to know about the book, what would it be?
Well, my current message for bookstores and libraries and parents is that the book is perfect for Halloween. But in terms of the plot of the book, the summary is, it's about a 13-year-old girl who moves to a small town, and she learns that her great-great-great-grandmother was executed for witchcraft there. And she also discovers an old book in her basement. And as she reads it, she realizes that it was written to her, and that she might be the only person who, along with a couple of friends that she makes, she might be the only person who can avert a catastrophe. And so that is the plot of the book.
I just got goosebumps. I will never open a book in the basement. And you've taken care of that for the rest of my life. Thank you so much, Jude. Well, that sounds amazing. And my hope is that people will go out and buy 10 copies and put it in trick-or-treat bags rather than candy. How great would that be for the neighborhood, the house that everybody wants to go to? Yeah.
My publisher thanks you.
Yes. Well, best of luck on the book. And what are you working on now? Are you working on something new?
I am, and I meant to have it finished by now, but I am working on another middle novel, and it's new characters, but it also is a small town Illinois setting, because I've realized I kind of want to be the middle grade Stephen King of rural Illinois. And although I don't have I don't have a title, the working title is Maybe There Are Ghosts.
Oh. Okay. Now, again, you're freaking us out. But thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. We wish you lots of luck with Maybe There Are Witches. This is a great book for the kids that you're trying to entice to read. These are topics that kids just grab their imagination. So I hope everybody, if you get a chance, will buy the book, or if somebody loans it to you, if you'll take a minute to leave a review. Reviews are also worth their weight in gold. So if you want to support Jude, buy the book and share it, and I'll review it. So we will be back in touch next week. Jude, thank you again. And this has been the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour.